Good afternoon, everyone. Or if you happen to be in Spain or Europe, where Kyle is situated, Spain, that is, good evening. What a pleasure it is. This is the 20th Mitch Rapp book. Wow, I was looking back, Kyle. How many did Vince write himself? Was it 10?
No, it's more than that. I think I almost said 13, I think. Might have been 13.
Okay, so how many have you done? I guess that would be the better
It would
question.
be like 7, yeah. So I guess that makes mine 7. I should know this. Yeah, this would be 7, yeah. I'm working on the 8th.
And it's the 20th in the whole Mitch Rapp series. So it really makes you think back to, I know I've told you before, the story of Vince Flynn driving up to the back of the Poison Pen when nobody knew him, getting out of his car, knocking on the door. He had books in his trunk, wanted to know if we would take a chance on a self-published author. Uh, he was so personable. It was kind of hard to resist, even though I don't normally do that. So I said, okay, what a good idea that turned out to be, right?
Yeah,
and
now
so,
term limits though, right? Term limits, his first book.
yeah, he drove around. It was like the guy that wrote The Bridges of Madison County. There was Vince in his car, driving
I think
around.
John Grisham started out the same way too, didn't he?
He did with A Time to Kill. I remember buying up all the copies of A Time to Kill that were left over at some convention that John had autographed. I mean, there were a load of them. It was, like people look back and say, how did you know? And the truth is, it's just because I was there. Or in Vince's case, because he came to call on us. I mean, it isn't always brilliance that that lets you do that. But we were really delighted to travel along with Vince. He wasn't able to come to the store because he was dying, as you all know, of cancer in, I think, 2013. But we do have a wonderful photo of Vince's last appearance at the Poison Pen. So Patrick's going to show it and points to anybody who can recognize the author standing there with him. It was a really banner afternoon.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you can see this, but
Yep, we can.
Yeah.
So there's Vince in his gray shirt, and there is Rick Riordan, who was just switching over from writing paperback crime novels for Bantam into his incredibly successful mythology-based series for young adult readers. And they just happened to coincide one afternoon at the Poison Pen, or actually one evening it was. So anyway, we treasured this photo and I'm very glad to have it.
Do you remember, Barbara, that we had a convention at the Biltmore one year where it was a pretty star-studded lineup? It was Vince, Lee Child, oh boy, I can't remember who else.
Well, it was the birth of Thriller Fest. It was 8 thriller writers: Kathy Rice, Lee Child, David Morrell, Gail Linz, Vince, trying to remember who all. Anyway, and that was the one where we were all in the bar afterward and they were grousing around about a different author support organization. And I got so tired of them, and I rarely swear, but I'd had it. I'd also had maybe 2 or 3 drinks. And I said, just shut up, guys. I said, why don't you form your own organization? And there was this electric pause. Oh, James Wallace, he was there too. There was this electric pause. And eventually David Morrell and Gail Linz kind of took up the banner. And that was the birth of Thriller Fest right that night. And Vince was there for it. So it was so cool. Anyway, we're here to talk to Kyle about Enemy at the Gates. And because Kyle's in Spain and he couldn't physically sign the books, what he did was he has his working outline, which he tells me he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to share with anybody. Is that right, Kyle?
Well, I did have to go through it and make sure there wasn't anything too embarrassing in there. But yeah, that's you'll be able to, people will be able to see my mind sort of exploded on pieces of paper and where the books come from.
I think that's fabulous. Anyway, Kyle signed individual sheets from the outline. And so each of our copies of Enemy at the Gates comes with a signed book plate and a signed copy of 1 page of the outline, which I think is a really cool package. Not as cool as having Kyle actually here signing them in the store, but it's the best we could do when he's in Spain for a year. Wonderful. Anyway, Patrick is going to be monitoring the Facebook comments. He's going to put a buy link in the comments field so you can click on it and buy one of these great copies. You don't have to request the extra stuff because it comes automatically. And after a while, we'll coax him back onto the screen to ask your questions and other stuff. So
Sounds
thank
good.
you, Patrick, very much. So how are you?
I am good. I'm good. Looking forward to the launch. You know,
Well,
it's always an exciting day.
it is an exciting day, Monday the 13th, fortunately not Friday the 13th. So we're in good shape. The book actually goes on sale tomorrow. So I'm delighted that we get this opportunity to talk to Kyle about it, as we have with all of these books. And I was saying to Kyle before we started that I have to say the critical reviews and the fan reviews have absolutely been wonderful. I love the one that starts, there's a wolf in the White House and a mole in the CIA. I thought, wow, it's just so good. It almost sounds like, The Wind in the Willows or something, except clearly it's not. Have you seen some of those reviews?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've seen a lot of them. I love reading the stuff the ambassadors do. We have this program for people who don't know that a bunch of the Vince's kind of super fans get the book first. We started it with the first book I wrote. And they get a chance to look at it and put their thoughts out on social media or whatever. And they do that. I love the reviews because a lot of them are really creative and fun and, big fans. So they see all the stuff that I try to do in there, bringing back old characters or situations or little Easter eggs and stuff. And it's kind of fun to write for people who really know the universe.
Well, and it is a big universe and there are lots of characters in it. Let's see, how many of you added to the ones that Vince added?
Oh, geez, I don't know. A lot, probably a lot. And then I've fleshed some out too, because I always wanted to know when I took over more about Scott Coleman, a little bit more about, where he came from, what his personality is like, what his relationship with Mitch was like, because it was always very business-like. So I've gotten to explore that. And yeah, I created, sort of his nemesis, Grisha Azarov, who was in a few books. And
Right.
I've actually brought back what was a very minor character from Total Power in the book I'm writing now. So that's a very interesting character. So kind of fun to mix them all together so people don't know which ones are really long-standing ones that Vince created and which ones are newer ones that I created.
What we've done is sort of create a slang and we call them verse, like there's the Cussler verse for Clive Cussler. And, there's do we call it the rap verse or the Mitch rap verse? What's the generic term?
I call it the rap verse because I think of the Ryan verse is where I got it from Tom Clancy. So
right.
Yeah, and I have a huge file on my computer called the rap verse, and it's like 150 pages long of every kind of detail out of every book, all the things he did and said and wears and what his house looks like and photos. Like my newer stuff, like I have photos of the houses I used. Maybe like Scott Coleman's house is actually a friend of mine's house. And I have pictures of their houses and what I imagined in Africa and all this. So I can always refer back to them and remember exactly what they looked like and describe them in different ways.
So it's true with universes, it's kind of an ever expanding thing, isn't it? And the truth is, if Vince were here today, 8 years after he died, he would have changed things. He would have brought in new characters. He would have, kept his plots aligned with real life events, which is certainly true of Enemy of the Gates we'll talk about. So I suppose as a legacy, do you feel empowered to do that on your own? I mean, there isn't any boundary that you can't break, or is there, for what Vince did? I guess you can't lie about anything he wrote. And you can't kill Mitch, or that would sort of blow the whole thing, but
no, I wouldn't say. I mean, nothing that I would do. That nobody's ever put any boundaries on me. I think I certainly wouldn't kill off there are a few core characters that I think make up the series, and you can't really kill them off. Though I'm pretty free about killing off characters that I would consider core characters. And the secret to the books, obviously, even more than keeping them current and making them feel, so give that sort of rip from the headlines feel that people always talk about, is, getting Mitch right. And so that is where the rubber hits the road. You're better off writing a bad book with Mitch right than a good book with Mitch wrong. So always capturing that character, but he can't be the same character as he was as Vince wrote,
Yeah.
because that was 8 years ago, and he wouldn't be if Vince had continued to write him. He gets older, he gets wiser, he has new experiences. He's got a girlfriend and kind of a quasi daughter now, and that's changing him. So there has to be this evolution, but it still has to be the guy that everybody knows.
What kind of decision did you make about aging Mitch?
That's a really hard one. Vince was doing it realistically, and I didn't feel like I could. So Mitch kind of always stays the same age, but he grows and he learns things. And in a way, I think he's a little more wiser. I think particularly in the book that I'm writing now, he's a little more reflective because of the situation he's in, both with the president and with the family. And he has to sort of evolve to meet that. But I'm not doing that in age exactly. The weirdest one, I think, for me is Anna, his kind of quasi daughter, because she's like 6 or 7 years old. And she's the one that's very obvious that she doesn't age, because she sort of is ever child. And I'm not sure what to do that. If I could keep him the same age, but make her eventually a teenager, which would be super fun. But I don't know. We'll have to.
Well, it would be super fun. You'll be interested to know that I've had this conversation with people who have dogs in their books, the canine things and all. And here's the thing: you can't age it in real time. Your dog will be gone. So anybody with a dog closely involved in the character really can't write. Can't age them in real time, because the dog's life is so much shorter. And that would certainly be true for Vince's daughter. But I don't think readers care. I mean, I think they sort of want it all to say the same, but at the same time, to grow and be different. It's kind of a suspension of disbelief that we all make a pact, to enjoy. And I also think the writers I know who did make a decision to age their characters in real time, and these characters turned out to be really successful, have probably regretted it. Because it then forces you.
Maybe,
Yes.
Yeah, I think of David Silva. So you have a character that's aged, and it's done so in a very progressive manner, makes perfect sense and everything. But I think it would be hard for me to, have Mitch Rapp become, I don't know, a mentor or a CIA executive or something like that. Because
well, physically, he'll eventually give out. I remember Nevada Barr saying to me that she had to retire Anna Pigeon because she had aged her in real time. And, at 50 something, she wasn't in the shape she was in at 30 something to take on some of the real punishment that she took as a park ranger. Without.
Right. And that's why I ended up killing off Stan Hurley, because I figured, I did the math, and he was like 83. And, I just couldn't, you couldn't be jumping through windows anymore.
No, well, much as we wish we would, we seniors, we do have to recognize. My husband and I are chasing our new children around. I sent you photos of the puppies. I'm exhausted. I had totally forgotten what it was like to potty train anything, whether it was a child or a dog, and it involves a lot of bending over. And, I find at 80, it's a lot harder to do it than when I was in my 20s.
Well, exactly. And it's funny because I have a very visceral sense of this, because Mitch and I are exactly the same age. So every year I get a year older, and I think this is what Mitch must feel like, when he gets out of bed every morning. But he doesn't really, because I've kind of knocked 10 years off him.
You found a wonderful elixir of life for Mitch. So, what the hell? What is it? This Spanish guy, Don, whatever it was, that searched around in Florida for the Fountain of Youth.
Oh, yeah, the Fountain of Youth. Yeah.
He would have loved you. Right. So we are 6 months on from Total Power, when we had a different crisis, obviously from Power, the grid. And do you know what? There was a really fascinating, I'm going to digress again for a moment, a really fascinating special shot mostly in Finland that Rob and I watched the other night about the Northern Lights and the effect of solar storms and how lethal they could actually be for the power grid. And that's not anything, that evil human forces can direct. But it hadn't really occurred to me until we watched this, 45 minutes or whatever with Finnish scientists doing amazing work and simulations, how vulnerable that our grid is, not just to human error or human intention, but to the workings of the solar system. Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because we really depend on our power grids for just about everything. You can't have populations like as large as we have and get by without them. So there are a lot of threats. I mean, Texas, obviously, right after I wrote that book, kind of Texas's grid went down, and people got a very small inkling of what I had written about, a much smaller scale on the Texas grid. So it is a scary thing, and I think it's something we should be thinking about.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the California fires have, illustrated for us how I guess PG&E hadn't done any upgrades since I was at Stanford in like 1960 or something. But, amazingly, people run out without power. In fact, we were inspired to install a generator, which was an expensive and time-consuming project. But sure enough, during a monsoon this summer, power went out, the generator kicked in, and it was just like, so I was grateful we had it. Anyway, Enemy at the Gates presents us with a new problem. And I think it would be best if Kyle sets it up and tells us what that is.
Well, I think the fun thing for me is to throw new wrenches at Mitch, and see how he reacts to them, because he's such a rich and real character going back, we've known him since he was in college. So I never really know how he's going to react. So my ideas are generally result from me coming up with something he hasn't faced before. I mean, like we were talking about, the whole power grid goes down, or a bioterror threat of a coronavirus a couple of years ago, something he had never done. And this one's kind of on a grander scale. It's he's always had presidents that he got along with and who admired him. And the new president is kind of a scumbag and really hates him, and has designs on power that do not really include Mitch Rapp and Irene Kennedy watching over him. So Mitch has never really experienced that, to have an adversarial relationship with the president, and neither has Irene. So that's kind of what I wanted to explore. And if you had a president who was really pushing to gain power, how hard would they push back? And frankly, what tools would they have to push back against the president?
Of course, you weren't inspired by any real life events.
No, it's funny, actually, it kind of went backward. I had wanted to write this 3-book arc about the fall of democracy in the United States. And that's what I did with the first draft of this book. Was the first of the installments. And, then you had the Capitol insurrection, and you had all the stuff flying around about stolen elections and everything. And it felt too close to home, to the point where you want to make your books feel real, but you don't want to make them, I don't know, so real that they might be depressing. So I cut like a lot, probably 10 or 12 chapters from the book that related to that, and left sort of the more kind of action stuff about Mitch in there, and less the build up to this sort of collapse of American democracy. So it was kind of an interesting process to think that through, and then kind of pull it back a little bit, but still leave the essence of this building adversarial relationship that I'm going to explore over the next few books.
Yeah, how interesting it is that thrillers have really more and more depend upon distrust or actual malfeasance within institutions that we are supposed to trust, i.e. our president and our leaders in Congress and so forth. And it reminds me, David Baldacci and I have had this conversation a couple of times, because Absolute Power, which the president, if you remember, turns out to be a serial rapist and killer, was the first book that I could remember where that kind of bond, you know, that law enforcement and, you know, political leaders and all were not supposed to be suspects, or not supposed to be, you know, evildoers, but rather people you could trust. And now more and more, when you read it, they're really our enemy. You know, they're the people that you have to watch out for. And your president in particular here is dangerous, because he has a wife who's just as ambitious and ruthless as he is. And so they're envisioning 4 terms, you know, 2 for him, 2 for her. So basically a 16-year run, in which, as we already know from a 4-year run that we've just experienced, can do incredible damage. So I thought you did, it was interesting that you created not just a wolf in the White House, but a wolf's mate in the White House. So did you do that from the beginning, or did she come on as kind of an additional player as you worked through the book?
No, it was kind of always, I think of them almost as one person. Their name's Cook, and I think of them as the Cooks, and that's what people, how they refer to them. And it was sort of, he's the right brain and she's the left brain. And again, this kind of comes from that fall of democracy idea that I didn't think you could pull it off in 8 years realistically, but I could see how you could do it in 16. I don't think our democratic institutions are as strong as we thought. And I think, you know, America's built on an idea and a belief. You know, it's sort of like the dollar bill is really just a green piece of paper. It isn't worth anything, except people believe it is. Now you have Bitcoin, it's even more so that way. So I thought that I could build a very realistic case for, over the course of numerous years, that they could bring down democracy and sort of install themselves permanently in power. And it's, you know, it's sadly, it has become realistic. I think it's become realistic enough that I didn't want to, that I kind of pulled back from the brink on writing it. And it's, I don't know, I think it's depressing, and I think it's, yeah, I think it's very much our fault. You know, I mean, the American people run this country, and we don't have to elect psychopaths on either side. You know, we could, you know, but these people, I think, have learned that the way you get elected is lie to people, you know, lie, cheat, and steal. So, and it works. They get reelected over and over and over again. So,
well, part of the problem is that, you know, the media that once brought some sense of investigation and accountability has been largely replaced by, you know, feeds and clickbait and misinformation and so forth. So, you know, the days of Walter Cronkite, or, you know, the Chicago Tribune, or even the New York Times, which has been wandered off into the left in a way that the Wall Street Journal is. I mean, I can't read the editorials in either newspaper anymore because they're so extreme. You know, I find myself reading the paper for the arts coverage and the Bridge Hand and other stuff. But I mean, it's just, I don't know what's up with the Wall Street Journal. I think they're just absolutely crazy. But anyway, but they have great editorial coverage for art. They're the only people that seem to go to art galleries that write about architecture or whatever. So, you know, I just kind of rip up the editorial page and the front page and carry on. But you're not even sure that they are giving you hard information anymore. It's mostly op-eds and, you know, whatever. So people don't have any really trustworthy sources. And God, there was,
and then they don't, you know, they don't, I think people have stopped applying their brains to things. You know, we've been taught to, you know, whatever, side with whatever our belief system is. And if somebody that is on our side says something, you know, we just let it wash over our brain without bumping into anything. And so much stuff is nonsense, and that people really buy into it. And it's kind of, it's kind of incredible because I do deep dives into a lot of things because they're, I think, oh, book stuff, they might be able to use it in the future. And like recent example is that, I don't know if you remember, but like a week ago, they were talking about how there were these 6 planes sitting on the tarmac in Afghanistan, had these American journalists and all these people, and the Taliban weren't letting them out, and there are people, beating up on Joe Biden and everybody over this and everything. I'm not sure those planes ever existed. I mean, it was on every news feed. There were senators talking about it and all this stuff. I can't find any corroboration that that ever really happened. But it was a great story. It blew up for 48 hours. It was super entertaining. And nobody ever thought, well, one of the reasons is it's a climbing charity. And I was a really big climber, and I was a member of a big climbing charity. And I thought, I've never heard of these people. Who are these people? Where are they from? Who are these people on the plane? Why are these, reporters that are supposed to be on these planes not reporting about it? Why are their agencies not reporting? And then it just fizzled, it's disappeared. So I still don't know what happened. I can't figure it out.
Well, we have
And
virtual
nobody thinks
reality, and
about
we
that.
have doctored, we have doctored film and doctored videos and the whole bit. Well, there's no point going on about it. What we become
But
is
why
tribal.
didn't somebody say
and-
so? Like you'd think the news would say, we can't corroborate it. Where do we think this just might be made up? Somebody just sent us an email, but it was a good story, so they didn't, nobody thinks about it.
Well, yeah. And tribalism, unfortunately, is when autocracy has a chance to succeed. So, I think nobody has ever reads Federalist Paper number 10 anymore. The one in which Mr. Madison warned everyone that if we became subject to a tyranny of minorities, our system would fail. And that's perilously close to where we are. So all you can do, though, is write, about Mitch Ramp holding firm. And, we like to think that ultimately he's going to defeat, Greg Hurwitz writes the Orphan X books, and I will go blank as to which one, but he has to contend with a president like the Cooks. And I have to say, and it was at a time when it was particularly comforting, that I think I read the end of that book like 5 times because I was so pleased at the fact that Orphan X eventually overcame this guy despite all the obstacles in his way, and it was like comfort reading to think, wow, we still could have a hero that could save us. But how realistic?
Yeah, but I mean,
is
save us
anyone?
in a way, save us from ourselves, which is a really interesting question. I mean, we are a democracy. If we vote in a tyrant, that's democracy. I mean, we asked for that. And so does somebody have a right to undo that? I mean, these are all like really interesting questions. And that Mitch is asking is, how much is it his job to save us from ourselves? I mean, he fought against, infiltrators and people trying to kill us and all that stuff. But if we're doing it to ourselves, is that his responsibility? And how would he handle that? So kind of a fun thing to think about. And, it's what's happening today. It's not, terrorists aren't killing 1,000 of us a day here. I mean, it's very much become an internal battle. I mean, you've got the Russians beating us down using Facebook, which is hilarious when you say it, but it's effective. You've got the Chinese, and the economic wars and all this stuff. So the world has really changed since the rise of Al-Qaeda. And I think thrillers have to follow that.
That's absolutely true. I mean, if Vince were here, he'd be having to deal with that too. And there's a real life example of what we were talking about in Turkey. When Kemal Ataturk became the George Washington of Turkey at the end of the First World War, he created a secular state. And the Turks were incredibly proud of it. My husband and I spent a lot of time in Turkey before Erdogan was elected. Istanbul was our favorite city to go visit. And it was a secular state. And they have basically elected an autocrat who, has pretty ruined it as a secular state and turned himself into an authoritarian figure and, used religion to bolster his power. And a lot of it comes from people living in the country who were not well educated and, were easy enough to fool, which also happened in Thailand. So, there are examples in front of us, real world examples of how this can go. Hungary, I guess, would be another case. Of course, they've had such an awful time with they were they were an imperial colony, and then they were, a country, and then they were various things, and then they were under the Soviets for a long time, but now they've elected an authoritarian ruler. I don't think Russia will ever go any other way than autocracy as their entire history. They've never lived under any system that wasn't autocratic. Even the communist leaders turned out to be just like the czars. So, maybe democracy really is a failing experiment. It may be that it just can't hold up when the world descends into tribalism and the fabric of so many things gets ripped. But here we have Mitch. So the wolf in the White House, the mole in the CIA. I just love that. What is Mitch going to do about them?
Well, without a lot of spoilers, you've got a guy who's the richest man in the world's first trillionaire, who has kind of retired from making money because obviously he has plenty and is sort of trying to help the world. And what I think is a little naive about how much the world wants to be helped and how many toes he's stepping on. People who changing the world order is not a good thing when there are a lot of people ruling that world order who are good at it and comfortable with it. So Irene's worried about him, and Mitch is a little out of work because of the president despising him. And so Irene convinces him to go, and after this guy is attacked and his people are attacked, to go try to figure out why, who, and to protect him. Mitch reluctantly takes on the job because he obviously is very close to Irene, and they find out that this is coming from much higher than just a bunch of businessmen who don't like this guy stepping on their toes, and that the CIA and the U.S. government are involved, and so he has to figure out exactly who it is and what he can do about it.
And of course, it takes him on global jaunts. I mean, any thriller like this, you wind up in various other countries. Uganda comes to mind. And how many different countries did you send him to on this go round?
Oh, I don't know, a lot. But it's funny because I don't like writing about places I can't go. And I honestly preferably I'd be there when I was writing about it. So because of COVID, I couldn't travel very much. But I had spent a fair amount of time living in South Africa. So, and that's where Claudia, his girlfriend, has a house there. So I thought, I'll set it there because I can do it easily from memory. And then it sort of expanded into Uganda and Saudi Arabia, obviously the United States. And so he gets around, pretty well. Places
yeah, I mean, I think that readers expect that, don't they? In a book like this, they expect a fair amount of movement and geopolitical travel and so forth.
I like it. Yeah, I mean, I like it. I think it lends interesting perspectives to things in different settings that maybe a lot of people aren't familiar with.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. So in addition to battling the president, he has to try to determine if there is a mole in the CIA, and we can't talk about that, sadly, because here we are before you've had a chance to read it. But I like the fact that he has like two fronts that he has to contend with.
Yeah, Irene's also kind of hamstrung, but she does just have the support of the government that she once did. And, it's also a little bit about how the CIA could, very easily be turned into something more like East Germany's Stasi, particularly with the technology. And so she's very reflective about that. I mean, she spends a lot of time thinking between her and the NSA, well, I could do this, but should I? And if the next person who takes over at the CIA, whether they would have the same, morals as she does, because, it wouldn't be hard. You really, I mean, I think it's been proven you kind of do whatever you want if you're in the US government. So These are all kind of interesting questions that come up and that Mitch has to dodge because, you know, of all this technology now that's rising up that he didn't have, you know, with the cameras and the facial recognition. It's getting hard out there on a secret agent.
You know, it really is. CCTV, I mean, as far as I can tell, watching British crime programs streaming, which is a good deal of our evening entertainment while we're not doing live events. I really miss being down at the store with authors instead of, you know, finishing up a lovely conversation and then going to watch something. But as far as I can tell, there's maybe 18 square feet in England that is not covered by some kind of a camera. And it really has changed the way the police procedurals work, you know, because I mean, they instantly call for footage for, you know, for roads, for any kind of shop or convenience thing, for traveling on the underground, for block to block stores, whatever. And then we watched one set in Berlin, a crime series set in Berlin, and the same thing. You know, I mean, the first thing they do now is call for the footage. You know, it's like forensics. You get the medical examiner and the forensic guy to the scene, and you know, it's getting harder for criminals not to leave traces of themselves there. And then the other part of that is that you instantly call for video footage. And so a lot of policing is trawling through footage. In fact, the one set in Berlin, eventually the mole in the police department is discovered because he got caught just on the edge of a video where he shouldn't have been. And that's the, you know, the magic key. So as a thriller writer, do you find yourself having to keep up with all this technology in order to let your characters use it?
Definitely. And, you know, I mean, there's a point where Mitch has to go to Saudi Arabia, which is doing the same thing kind of as London and places like that with AI. And in his mind, it's almost like he lands there and the fuse is lit. And he only has so long before the AI figures out who he is. So he's kind of like, I got to get in here, I got to do what I do, 48 hours, and then I better be out of here, or, you know, the entire intelligence, you know, apparatus is going to come down on me. But it is different. It's, yeah, the level of technology, and technology is a big part of this book with telecommunications technologies and stuff, and how you would track it. And I think that's just becoming more and more, you know, part and parcel of the day. I mean, sometimes, honestly, I think, I don't know, I'd love to write a, you know, a Soviet era, you know, like early 60s thriller where, you know, people had briefcases full of documents and microfiche and all that stuff. And, you know, physical, you know, if you were going to listen in on people, you had to like sit in the attic and kind of drill a hole and lower a thing down. It just seems like such a romantic time to me compared to, like you're saying, police work turning into, you know, going through, you know, 100 hours of footage taken from cameras.
Or cell phone records. That's the other thing, is that a lot of
records.
crimes, you know, will be solved when people say, oh, I didn't know Joe. And then, you know, they call for the cell phone records and discover, you know, that there are 17 phone calls made to Joe's number. And none of that stuff goes away.
No, you know, people are so fired up to be famous now. I mean, there's good chance they're just going to kill somebody and Facebook Live it. So it's it's definitely an interesting change. I think it's a strange world we live in. It definitely is a strange time to be a thriller writer, I think, because maybe it's because I'm getting old enough that I see the cycle. Like everything that I remember bad happening when I was young is starting to just sort of return in exactly the same way in a way. And it's almost like everything you do is it's a little bit self-inflicted. And it was interesting. I was one of the reasons I think COVID was interesting in that we almost kind of had to step back and stop inflicting problems on ourselves. And it was kind of like, well, not too many mass shootings or whatever, because, you know, nobody was out, or, you know, all the spy craft that was going on and all this stuff kind of died down because nobody could go. And you think, wow, if everybody just stopped doing this stuff all at once.
Yeah,
during
pollution went way down,
Yeah,
traffic. I
pollution
mean, you
went
could find
down.
parking spaces and traffic was okay. And, I think where was it? They said in Nairobi, it was the first time in, forever that you could actually see
See the
Kilimanjaro.
mountains, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
But
kind of an
yeah,
interesting, it's a strange time, I think, to be a thriller author because, Russia has a very strange, it's a threat, a big threat, I think, but a strange one. Um, obviously you've had a decline in Islamic terrorism. We'll see what happens with the pullout of Afghanistan. China is a threat, but a very kind of different kind of threat again, even than the Soviets were. So, a lot of internal problems, I think.
well, that's true. I mean, the Chinese want to steal stuff from us and the Soviets want to interrupt stuff. And, they're slightly different. And then I'm sure you saw the conclusion from an FBI report or something that the Saudis really didn't have anything to do with 9/11. Which was a big surprise because that was the basis in part for a lot of the action that was taken. And, people are criticizing Biden for withdrawing in the manner of it, which I think could have been improved, but we all forget that it was a Republican that got us there. So I mean, it hasn't been like a one-party war by any means. Been
No.
and
Bit
there's
of a
a lack.
20-year train wreck, really.
Well, there is, and I also think, and I read something, and I believe it, that since World War II, any of these conflicts, we've never gone into it 100%. We've never fully committed, not to Korea, not to Vietnam, not to Afghanistan, not to the Gulf War and all. And unless you're all in, the chances are that, you're not really going to win. I mean, Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. I don't know, the British couldn't do anything with it, the Russians couldn't do anything with it. And, why did we think that we could do anything with it? And why should we do anything with it, except it was kind of a roll on? So, and now everybody wants to blame the current administration for it, but the roots of it go way back. And I don't know that there's any, I mean, if anybody remembers the fall of Saigon, I don't know that there's any good way to exit from a situation like that without calamity.
No, I mean, and the question is, I mean, I don't know, we pulled out. It's an interesting situation. Obviously, I write about this, but we pulled out. We pulled a bunch of people out. How many people was the right number? I don't know. It was a 20-year train wreck. I think it's something that hopefully people will remember. I'm not sure. I think one of the dangers of trying to lay this all at Joe Biden's feet, a guy who's been president for all of 8 months of this 20 years, is that, maybe people will be able to convince themselves, oh, we'd have won that war if it hadn't been for, I don't know what, the plane's not being flown smoothly out enough, I don't know. And that we'll try to do it again and, lose.
And the other question is, did the people, in Afghanistan actually want us to win the war? I mean, it's like Vietnam. I mean, I am a Vietnam War widow. And when I finally worked up the courage to go to Vietnam with my family who really wanted to see it, not for that reason, but just as tourists, go down the Mekong and all the rest of it, you realize that the Vietnamese, their enemy forever was China, or has been China, and they don't actually attach much to the Vietnam War, and that was so, shattered us here in America and caused the same kind of divides and all the rest of it. But they didn't really want us, to be there to save them, and I don't think the Afghans did either, at least not all of them. So what are you going to do if you're trying to foist something upon people who don't necessarily want it? I mean, we can't even get the vaccine people, the anti-vaxxers to accept it. So why do we think the Afghans were going to? I don't know why we got so political here. We're supposed to be talking about your book. I'm sorry, I seem to be in a mood.
Well, I do write political thrillers.
No, I just
about the Middle East largely. So, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's happening in political thrillers, though, isn't it? The world has turned complicated. It's not, the Tom Clancy days or the Ludlum days where, books were written really very much about the Soviet Union. You had kind of a serial killer period where everyone would write about serial killers, And then you had the terrorism, and these were all, I mean, they weren't monolithic threats, but it was pretty clear. And now you have just a very fragmented,
Yeah.
you know, threat profile. I mean, you have, I mean, not to get, you know, super political. I don't know why this is political, but you think about climate change, you know, and the destruction it causes both in the West where it's dry and it burns, and in the East where it's, you know, wet and it floods. And, you know, that's another, not only a threat profile necessarily, but also a setting that you have to keep in mind as you're writing a thriller novel. So it's really is interesting how everything has become very interrelated and very complicated, and trying to pick through that and create a narrative is difficult if you want to write political thrillers. You know, you can always pull back, like a lot of people, I think, a lot of my contemporaries have thought, well, I'm going to maybe pull back a little bit and do something more personal about my character, you know, a battle with, you know, a person from the past or whatever, as opposed to, you know, tackling God knows what, Iran and Saudi Arabia and all these things, all these interrelated threads, and then all the internal strife in the United States from both sides. So it's going to be interesting to see how every generation of thriller writer, you know, seems to wrap their arms around the environment they're given and create really interesting stuff about it. And I think we're at the cusp of that, of this sort of new world, you know, maybe the end of the terrorism cycle and potentially something very different. And it'll be interesting to see what people do with it.
You know, you've made me realize there's a huge proliferation of World War II stories, and thinking about it more and more, it was a one-on-one kind of a thing. It was much more simplified. The threat was either the Nazis or the Japanese if you were in the other theater. And, you know, what you're talking about is a mosaic of threats that Mitch is trying to deal with. It isn't just a threat. I mean, as you said, back when Ludlum and Clancy were writing, you know, it was like us and then it was Russia. And, you know, even in the 90s, it was us and, or, you know, especially after 9/11, it was us and then it was the Middle Eastern. I mean, every thriller that you picked up was more or less, you know, somebody combating some kind of Middle Eastern terrorism. I mean, we were in a sandbox all the time instead of Siberia or whatever. But
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
you know, now where do you go? I mean, let's see, Brad Thor wrote about the Chinese and the Arctic and Norway. You have this book. The book I recommended to you, Ice Angel, which I absolutely love, is the Chinese and the Canadian Arctic, but the same idea that they're trying to create a stake, you know, so they can be a player for the resources in the Arctic and also for the, you know, for the travel. And let's see, you know, I don't know what Mark's new book is about. I was just looking at it today, but everybody is, you know, is choosing whether to do a big mosaic or pinpoint something like Brad did in Black Ice, much more specific, you know, with Scott looking, essentially he's in Norway, you know, dealing with this Chinese threat rather than all over the place. And I think that's a very legitimate way to go. Makes a great story. You know, reader gets all engaged in it. It's a real threat. I mean, there's no question that what that is a real threat. So you're right. There are choices that you can make as a thriller writer about whether to have a much more focused plot or a much more diverse plot.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because it's become, like with the Chinese in particular, the threat is, in a way, is almost more of a competition. You know, you had kind of a good versus evil before. I mean, you could certainly portray that pretty easily with terrorism, and even with the Soviet Union, who, you know, really were out kind of for world domination. They had a very twisted, you know, way of thinking, and we certainly wouldn't have wanted to live under that. the Chinese just, kind of want to win. There's a playing field and they're going to do everything they can to win on it. And much less than, we're going to subjugate, Europe and the United States and turn you into our slaves or whatever, it's all more of a, we just want to be more effective at selling you cheap stuff and, making tons of money. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a different, it's just a little bit of a different vibe. I read a book recently about China. I thought it was really interesting because we were operating there and we needed to get somebody out who knew, who had the secret information, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, a lot of people were getting killed and everything. And I thought it's kind of funny because if the Chinese read that book, they would have seen it the exact opposite. The Americans had come over and were trying to kidnap somebody from China who had information we wanted and killed a bunch of cops doing it. But it's from our perspective, so that's a good thing. So I'm sure the Chinese thriller writers write the exact same story set in the United States, and so it's an interesting. I don't know,
It is an interesting thing. And you also have to remember that
yeah.
China is making a comeback, from being basically, a colonial. They became a colonial outpost of Britain in particular, but European nations. And so they're also fighting to overcome that. They've always been a great mercantile nation, which the Russians never were. So, I mean, they have a whole historical background that Russia does not have, and it does definitely make them different. I realize we've been talking for almost an hour and haven't let anybody else into this conversation.
Let's do that.
So,
Yeah,
Patrick, I apologize to the people watching who might like to ask questions. Time for me to shut up and let them do that.
That was a great conversation. Let's see here. What do we have? Okay, yeah, Justine asks, is there any specific technology or something similar that excites you as a thriller writer?
That excites me. I think that kind of scares me. I mean, I think what we were talking about is probably the most dominant one, is the proliferation of artificial intelligence and cameras and monitoring of phones and our movements, and the ability for supercomputers to crunch that data and to profile us. The Chinese are very good at that already, and that it could happen here. In fact, it's going to be very hard to stop it. So I think that's a slippery slope we're headed down. It's probably interesting fodder for thrillers, but cuts a little close to home.
Yeah, I mean, once the genie's out of the bottle, right? I mean, hard to get back in. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Well, Debbie asks, if we haven't read any of the series, can we just jump in with this one?
Yes.
Barbara says yes.
Sure. I try to make sure. Yeah, I try to make sure that it's all clear, that everybody's reintroduced to some extent too. But yeah, try this one, and I imagine that it's like I said, it's an amazingly rich universe, like Barbara was saying, and then you'll probably want to go back and start with the ones Vince started with Mitch in college, and move all the way forward in chronological order.
Is that a challenge as a writer, to figure out exactly how much backstory to put in to orient the new reader without boring the longtime reader?
It's horrible. I mean, it's the reason I never really wrote series books on my own. I think I wrote 4 books about one character, and I found that that's what was happening. And I thought, either people are going to, get really bored, or they're going to not know enough about their past. And after 4 books, the past started really building up. And when I took this job, I really thought about that. And I put a huge amount of effort into making sure the characters are well drawn for a new reader, but do so in a way that maybe a different perspective, seeing the person from a different perspective or from a different person's point of view, so that it feels, fresh even to people who've read the whole series.
Right. It's funny. I'm not sure, Barbara, I'm not sure if Kyle's ever actually addressed this, at least that I've heard. But for a lot of or authors, there'll be like a Bible, that about the character, about what's going on, and how free do you feel that you're able to deviate from what Vince did? Are there things that you couldn't do?
I try never to deviate. I sometimes make mistakes though. I made a mistake on Joe Maslick, who's one of his team's background, and I invented a new background for him because I had somehow deleted his background from my Bible. And somebody pointed it out to me, but now I'm just going to stick with it because it's more current.
Born again, just say he was born again, Lord.
Yeah, I was really embarrassed about that.
Well, it's funny. We've asked people like, Ace Atkins, who's continued Robert B. Parker Spencer series, and, Mark and others who've done Tom Clancy's continuations, and they all have different kind of variations on that answer, what they feel like they can do.
Yeah, well, the Ryan verse would got to be something else to try to keep your arms around.
Yeah, especially since there are two parts to it, father and son.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a question, and I have a feeling your editor might be watching, but there's a question John asks, does Kyle's editor significantly improve the final version of his novels? This is a plant, isn't it?
You, Emily.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think so. I mean, you get that set of eyes on there and, mistakes you've made, things that you can't see, you've got points that lag or characters that don't make sense, or, there's always those things that I think an author can't see. You get so close to your work. And then Emily also, who's my editor and Vince's editor, has her own feelings as a fan about the series. And, where maybe we differ and go back and forth. She's much more bloodthirsty than I am, for instance. So
Emily? Really?
Oh yeah. So definitely, like, I shy away from the really graphic violence, and she pumps it up. So she's typically right, so I think absolutely. And different editors and authors have different relationships, so it kind of depends on
Well, it helps that she was Vince's editor, right? So I mean, it provides continuity in that,
absolutely.
If she worked with him. I mean, it's amazing to me the long careers that some editors have the stamina and the willpower, to stick with it for so long. Because I mean, editing is really hard work. And this year 20th Mitch Rapp, that's 20 books that Emily has worked on. That's a lot.
Yeah, and it has that long history of it, and sometimes you duke it out a little bit, but it always makes you think. If you're having a disagreement, why, am I justified in this disagreement, or am I just, is it just ego, or why am I doing what I'm doing? Do I have a good reason? So I think it really makes you think more deeply about your own writing and, why you've done what you've done.
Well, I can also add, as an editor, because I've edited hundreds of books, that the editor's not always right. The editor may take a position or think about something, but ultimately the book belongs to the author, and it can be that the editor, isn't right for this particular book, or if the author's wish over trumps that. I mean, editors are not God, and it's a give and take. The object being to come out with a better book that satisfies everybody.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think it's definitely an important part of the process.
All right, let's see, I have a few more here. Sorry, I just lost my place. Okay, Joshua, he says, thank you, Mr. Mills, for your epic, iconic work. Your novels are masterful and very cinematic in nature. Are there any films that influenced your writing over the years? Hope to see these novels turned into films or TV series.
Films that influenced my writing. No, you know, obviously, I wish I could come up with a good example of that, but I'm much more of a book guy than a film guy. So, you know, I read a lot of different kinds of books, not just thrillers. And I always try to find something the authors did, even if it's, I mean, like right now, I'm reading a book of short stories in Spanish by an Argentine author that are horrors, like ghost stories. And you know, I'm not going to send Mitch after any Argentine ghosts probably anytime soon. But there are things she does that are I really admire, and I think, you know, how could I bring that to one of my novels in a way that would fit? So I would say it's much more books and the style that people, you know, the style they write in, and how did they get through a boring section or whatever. And I find that much more inspirational. I never really thought of movies and books as being the same thing at all.
So there's one Vince Flynn movie, American Assassin, right?
Yeah.
But I assume the whole series is available as an option if somebody wants to turn it into long form television. It's hard to believe that it hasn't happened yet, given the way they've pounced on so many of these long successful franchises. But you can't talk about it even if it were, you can't say anything.
No, it is surprising. But I think it's much more interesting now because now you have things like Netflix and Amazon.
Right.
You can do it so much more long form than, you know, trying to do, particularly one of Vince's books. Vince's books were pretty long, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And trying to do, you know, a 500 or a 700-page book and cram it into 2 hours
was American
Well, it'll be interesting to
Assassin.
see how Jack Carr's, you know, James Reese long form, or maybe that's a movie. I can't remember. Maybe it's actually a movie. But you know, if that's successful, they're revisiting Lee Child, the Tom Cruise thing. They're now turning it to long form television. So you know, you and Brad both. Mark has got either a film or TV. I can't remember which. That's wrapped up. I think he had an amazing cast. I don't know if you've noticed it, but I mean, wow. So I would think that they would spawn interest in more of these kinds of books if they're successful. You know, somebody has to go first and do really well. And then there's kind of like a gold rush then that occurs, you know, among people who produce video or film.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, Mitch is such an iconic character, you know, hopefully it'll happen. It was fun to watch it on the big screen. Like, I mean, I really enjoyed it. In fact, I had a really good time doing that because I had, I was very naive about I don't know anything about the movie industry at all. And I was going on tour and I said, well, people are going to ask me about this and I haven't seen it because it wasn't out yet. And I said, can you just like mail me a DVD of it? And they kind of freaked out. Like, no, this is like the highest security thing ever. And I said, well, you know, I mean, what are we going to do? And so they flew somebody out. I swear to God, they have like a briefcase with a handcuff on it or something. And it only fits in one projector. And they had to rent out a movie theater in my town. So me and my wife and some friends went and like sat in the movie theater by ourselves and got to watch the Mitch Rapp movie.
That's so funny. That's like a diamond courier, isn't it?
Wow. Oh, it's very much. And like they were saying, that like the tape, that whatever it is, it's like probably a stick now, only fits in that one projector. So it's like a big deal. Wow. And so, so we went and we finally got to watch the movie, and it was really fun to see those characters, you know, brought to life, and to see, you know, how they matched or didn't match your view of them.
Who played Mitch Rapp?
God, now it's like it's late.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, you did. You put me on the spot.
I'll look it up while you ask another question, Patrick.
He's actually a really well-known actor, and he did an amazing job.
It wasn't Dom DeLuise, is what you're saying. No.
It was definitely not. No.
I don't think he's
young guy.
Young guy.
Because you know, Mitch was in college at the time.
Yeah.
So this guy was right around the same age, and he did an incredible job. So
it's funny they talk about
Dylan O'Brien.
Dylan O'Brien.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. See, I don't have daughters, so like apparently he's a huge heartthrob, but he did
Yeah,
amazing
he
job.
really is. Now that I'm looking at his photo, whoo.
Yeah, exactly. But
I always thought that Lee Marvin in his prime would have been a good Jack Reacher.
yeah, I could see that. He's really tall.
Yeah. He was such a badass too. I have a quick question for you, Kyle. Can you talk about España and how long you've been going to Spain and what took you there in the first place? And I take it you speak Spanish fluently.
No, not really. Spanish is hard. Yeah, I've been lucky and I've lived all over the world, and I've really always enjoyed traveling. And we decided to come here for a year. That's something I'd never done. The longest I'd ever lived somewhere was maybe 4 months, which was in Africa. And we do it for a year. I always wanted to try to learn to speak a foreign language fluently. So we came for a year and we really enjoyed it. And we just sort of decided we'd go back and forth. So 1 year in the United States, 1 year in Spain. And that was it. We got a little bit of interference from COVID, but we managed to skid in a week back to Spain a week before our residency expired. So we were kind of lucky.
You are lucky. It's a beautiful part of Spain too. I've been there a couple of times and think it's wonderful.
Where is it?
Yeah, we really like it. We're in the south in Granada, not on the beach though. We're up in the mountains. So we're about
definitely up. It's like the Sierra Nevada. You know, Malaga's on the Mediterranean, but if you go up to Granada, I would go there just so I could hang out at the Alhambra more often. I mean, I've been there for New Year's Eve, which was one of the best New Year's Eves ever. Our young grandson, we didn't realize then he was drinking sangria. We thought he was drinking juice. So he had a particularly good New Year's Eve in the Gypsy Cave. And then near the Alhambra in Granada. But it was a Moorish city, but it was also a Catholic city. The Los Reyes Católicos are buried there, Isabella and Ferdinand, which is where the Spanish Inquisition started. They're the people who funded Columbus. There's a lot going on in Granada.
Yeah, it was the last place that the Muslims were kicked out of, the last spot in 1492.
Yep, and they were very tolerant. I mean, you know, we don't think of them that way now, but they were very tolerant. Muslims and Jews and Christians all lived together in amity in Granada until Isabel fell under the evil influence of some ardent Roman Catholics. And once that starts, you know, it's really bad news. So, but anyway,
you can never eradicate it. Yeah, because it's still very, you know, a lot of Arab influence. You know, if you listen to the music, you know, you've got the Alhambra, which is a big, you know, fortress, a big
a lot of flamenco
fortress. There. Oh yeah.
Gitanos close by. Yeah.
Spotted. We used to live in a Moorish house, in an Arab house. So like in the archways of the house was all Arabic writing still. And everything was about 500 years old. So
beautiful architecture. Yeah. Beautiful gardens too. They really understood water. You know, so their gardens and their water are spectacular. It was really too bad. I personally think that it's a shame that they got booted out, but that's the way it goes. Anyway, that was how many hundreds of years ago?
A lot of them stayed, to be true. Yeah, hundreds of years ago, but a lot of them stayed. So it's the influence is still, it's a little hard to extricate them since they've been intermarrying and stuff for a long time at that point. So it's still a bit of a melting pot of those two cultures.
Anything else, Patrick?
I think that's about it.
Well, well, Kyle, what a pleasure. Just I said, one of the things is, you know, we meet to do this and we're having a wonderful time. And there's so little we can actually say about the book. That it leads us off into all these other discussion points because almost everything is a spoiler once you get past just those initial comments. So, you know, maybe what we should do is make it a rule that when we meet up for the next book, we get to talk about the ending of, or how this book went as the first, you know, like segue into it. figuring that if it's been a year, people will have mostly read it, or just do it separately. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it'd be fun. It'd be interesting to do like a little like book club.
Well, we
do
could.
kind
We
of a
did
book
one with
discussion.
Brad. We did one
Oh, you
with
did?
Brad Thor for the book before Black Ice last year. Part of the problem is just finding the time, but this would be a really interesting book to do that. So if you're just lolling around in Spain,
That's all I do.
Yes,
all
you're
around.
working hard. Come on. Maybe we can find time to do it because I think it really would. This is a book that would really be worth a whole discussion. So perhaps
we
we
call
can.
it the Spoiler Society or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe we can set
yeah,
that
it
up.
is.
Yeah,
The-
no, I
the
like that,
nature.
Patrick. That's a really good title, right? There we go. Anyway, Cal, it's really been wonderful to see you. I'm glad we got to do this. Let me remind you, Patrick will hold up. We do have these wonderful books, and we do have a autograph piece sheets for each book, one sheet of the working outline that Kyle did, and a book plate while they last. So don't delay ordering your copy. Remember, tomorrow is the actual on sale date, so you're not too late. Anyway, adios.
Yeah, great talking to you both.
It was.
You.
Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Kyle, I'll send you the link for the podcast and the video tomorrow.
Great.
Okay, wonderful.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.